It's October 10th, 1973. A vice president walks into a federal courtroom, admits to hidden payments going back years, and by that afternoon, he's resigned. Sir, he's not even close to the worst man to ever hold this job. From a vice president who put a founding father in the ground, to one who resigned the office to build the intellectual case for slavery, to one who spent over a year kept in the dark while his own president secretly fell apart. This is the worst vice presidents in American history. Some of these guys were pathetic, forgettable, furniture. Others were brilliant, and used that brilliance to do real damage. You've heard the vice presidency called a joke, a nothing job, a guy who waits around. By the end of this list, the joke stops being funny fast. But first, let's start at the bottom of the barrel. Number 9. Charles Curtis, Hoover's vice president, 1929 to 1933. Sir, he was historic. The first person with Native American heritage to hold the office. Elected on a ticket that won by more than 6 million votes. And then the country fell apart underneath him. The stock market crashed. Breadlines formed. And Hoover barely used him. Imagine getting hired as co-pilot and then never once being handed the controls. Curtis wasn't scheming or corrupt. He was just quietly, completely irrelevant. When someone asked him about the Depression, he called it, and I'm not making this up, a natural economic fluctuation. Sir, millions of people out of work. And that's the read. By 1932, Hoover lost in a landslide, 59 electoral votes to Roosevelt's 472. Was Curtis just weak? Or was he set up to fail by a president who never once let him in the room? Historians still argue both. Either way, he earned his spot on this list by doing almost nothing at all with the second highest job in the country. And that's just the warm-up. Yikes! But nothing at all is still better than what's coming. Number 8. William King, elected vice president in 1852. Sworn in from Cuba because he was too sick with tuberculosis to travel home. He described himself, in his own words, as looking like a skeleton. He died 5 weeks into his term without ever making it to Washington. The only vice president in American history sworn in on foreign soil, and the only one who never worked a single day of the job stateside. Sheesh. Tragic, not villainous. But sir, if this office ever had a rock bottom, that's it right there. Man, that's cold. And it's about to get colder, because at least Curtis and King knew, more or less, what was going on around them. This next guy didn't. Number 7. Thomas Marshall, Woodrow Wilson's vice president, 1913 to 1921. Here's the twist people get wrong. Marshall wasn't the one who was incapacitated. Wilson was. In October 1919, Wilson suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed and barely able to function. And for months, the people closest to him hid just how bad it was. Not just from the public, from Marshall. That's like your backup quarterback finding out, weeks later, that the starter's been unconscious on the sideline the whole time. Marshall himself joked about how powerless the job was, calling himself, quote, the Wilson administration's spare tire, to be used only in case of emergency. Funny line. Except the emergency happened, and the spare tire just sat in the trunk. There was no 25th Amendment yet. That fix didn't arrive until 1967, so there was no clean legal path for Marshall to step in even if he'd wanted to. Coward? Or just constitutionally stuck with no good options? That's still argued. Either way, for over a year, America was quietly run by a small circle of aides and a determined first lady, while the man one heartbeat from the presidency waited outside a closed door. That's the office at its most powerless. Now let's watch it get dirty. Number 6. Schuyler Colfax, vice president under Ulysses S. Grant, 1869 to 1873. Colfax came in as a Civil War-era reform Republican. Smiling, popular, seemingly clean. Then came Crédit Mobilier, one of the biggest scandals of the Gilded Age. Railroad insiders had been quietly handing out discounted company shares to sitting members of Congress, basically buying political protection for a scheme tied to an estimated $180 million in railroad capital. That's like handing free lottery tickets to the people who write the lottery laws. One lawmaker caught up in it bluntly admitted the whole point. "We want more friends in this Congress. We should not be interfered with." Colfax defended himself before a House committee in January 1873 and was never convicted. But even his own biographers admit he was never really cleared either, just unproven, which, in politics, is its own kind of guilty. The reform guy image never came back. Sheesh. And this next one wasn't about money at all. It was about who he chose as collateral. The ugliest story on this whole list. Number 5. Richard Mentor Johnson, Martin Van Buren's vice president, 1837 to 1841. He's the only vice president in American history ever elected by the Senate, after falling one single electoral vote short in 1836. The country almost kept him off the ticket entirely. His claim to have personally killed the Shawnee leader Tecumseh is still unproven and debated by historians. But the real scandal wasn't the battlefield. It was his decades-long relationship with an enslaved woman named Julia Chinn, a relationship built without her consent, beginning when she was likely only 14 to 16 years old. Even Andrew Jackson, no stranger to controversy himself, warned Van Buren that keeping Johnson on the ticket would lose the democracy thousands of votes. Jackson was worried about the politics. History should remember it as something far worse: exploitation dressed up, for over a century, as scandalous romance. It wasn't romance, it was abuse, wrapped in enough political spin to survive in textbooks for generations. Man, that's cold. The office kept picking balance over character. Curtis, Johnson, both chosen to round out a ticket, not to run a country. And that pattern was about to blow up in the most public way possible. Number 4. Spiro Agnew, Richard Nixon's vice president, 1969 to 1973. Everybody remembers Watergate. Agnew's downfall wasn't Watergate. It was older, and honestly, dumber. Federal prosecutors uncovered payments going back to his time as a Maryland county official. Kickbacks that continued, prosecutors alleged, even while he sat as vice president. On October 10, 1973, the same date we opened this video with, Agnew pleaded no contest to a single felony tax evasion charge, admitting in court he'd received $29,500 in unreported taxable income back in 1967. Sentence: 3 years probation, a $10,000 fine. Same day, he resigned. In his own words, "I hereby resign the office of Vice President of the United States, effective immediately." No trial, no drawn-out saga. A vice president doing a same-day plea deal, resignation, and constitutional succession crisis, all before the sun went down. He's the only vice president in modern history pushed out by his own criminal case, and it forced the country to actually use its brand-new 25th Amendment process for the first time. Sheesh. And you'd think a courtroom confession would be rock bottom. It's not even close. Because this next one didn't just embarrass the office. He tried to burn the whole country down. Number 3. John C. Breckinridge, James Buchanan's vice president, 1857 to 1861. The youngest vice president in American history, just 36 years old when he took office. After his term, he went to the Senate. Then the Civil War started. And Breckinridge did the unthinkable for a former vice president of the United States. He fled south, and on November 2nd, 1861, formally accepted a commission as a Confederate general. He was promoted to Major General the following April, and by February 1865, he'd risen all the way to Confederate Secretary of War. Was he reluctantly swept along by his home state, or did he walk into treason with his eyes wide open? Still argued today. What's not argued is the outcome. A man who once stood one heartbeat from the American presidency ended the war actively fighting to destroy it. That's not embarrassment. That's betrayal in uniform. And it didn't come from nowhere, because the ideas behind it had already been built years earlier by a much sharper mind. Number 2. John C. Calhoun, Vice President under two different presidents. John Quincy Adams, then Andrew Jackson, from 1825 to 1832. Calhoun wasn't a fool. He was arguably one of the most brilliant political theorists of his generation, and he used that brilliance to build the intellectual scaffolding for nullification, the idea that states could simply reject federal law they disagreed with, and, more chillingly, to become one of slavery's most articulate elite defenders. He resigned the vice presidency in December 1832 to fight for these ideas directly from the Senate floor. Historians still debate whether his real breaking point with Jackson was ideology or an old Washington social feud known as the Petticoat Affair. But nobody debates where he ended up. In a speech on February 6, 1837, he said the quiet part out loud. "I hold that the relation now existing in the slaveholding states is, instead of an evil, a good, a positive good." Sit with that for a second. Not a necessary evil, a positive good. That's not ignorance talking. That's a trained legal mind constructing a defense for the indefensible. And it laid the groundwork that men like Breckinridge would later pick up a rifle for. Sir, if you think a man building the intellectual case for slavery is the worst this office ever produced, wait until you meet the one who killed a founding father and still got a standing ovation. Number 1. Aaron Burr, Thomas Jefferson's Vice President, 1801 to 1805. On July 11, 1804, at dawn in Weehawken, New Jersey, the sitting Vice President of the United States raised a pistol across 20 paces and killed Alexander Hamilton. He was indicted for murder in two separate states, New York and New Jersey, and never stood trial on either charge. And here's the part that never makes it into the shorthand version of this story. Burr didn't vanish. He went back to Washington. In March 1805, he delivered one of the most famous farewell addresses in Senate history, calling the chamber a sanctuary, a citadel of law, of order, and of liberty, and received it, by most accounts, as one of the finest presiding officers the Senate had ever had. 2 years later, in 1807, he faced a separate treason trial over an alleged scheme to carve out his own territory in the West. He was acquitted, though how real or exaggerated that plot actually was, is still argued. Burr may have been one of the most talented men ever to hold this office. He's also the only vice president to kill a man in a duel and casually resume his day job the following week. I'm not crying, you're crying. So here's the recap, sir. One vice president was the only man ever elected by the Senate itself. One admitted his own crimes and resigned in a single afternoon. One left the country to fight for the other side. And one, the worst of all of them, killed a founding father and still got a standing ovation on his way out the door. Turns out the vice presidency was never really a nothing job. It just attracted a startling number of nothing men and an even more dangerous handful of brilliant ones. Because sometimes the scandal isn't the man who got the job, it's the man who got picked in the first place. From a running mate dropped from the ticket mid-campaign, to one who nearly sank a race before it even launched, to a pick history still can't agree was a mistake. That's the worst presidential running mates in American history. Click right here and keep watching. Time equals so.